you considered the messages your outfits send? What do you think your clothes say about you? See, style is about the clothes, but it's not really about the clothes. Every day you make choices about what you're going to wear, but what are you communicating? Welcome to Above and Beyond Style. I'm your host, Maria DiLorenzo, and in 2019, I founded MFD Style, where I provide a unique, intuitive approach to personal styling for those ready to embrace a more meaningful look. With this podcast, I'll uncover key elements of where spirituality, psychology, and style intersect, revealing how you can make intentional wardrobe choices that reflect who you really are. So let me ask you, are you ready to transform into your authentic self? Then it's time. Come with me on this journey, and together we'll take your style above and beyond style. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to Above and Beyond Style. Again, this is season 2, where I get to talk with some of my favorite people who are experts, friends, and have such an interesting perspective to offer to really deepen this conversation about the way style, psychology, and spirituality all intersect. So today's guest is someone that I'm really excited to share with you and to talk with you, because we could probably do this all day long if we were allowed. We've been known to have conversations that have lasted multiple hours, but I promise we won't go that long for you today. But I want to introduce you and welcome you with Lindsay Morlock, who is, again, one of my favorite people, but she is a gifted intuitive, a breathwork facilitator, a hand analyst, and a spiritual coach. Now, her approach to healing is grounded in helping others to bridge the gap between the spiritual and the practical realms. Through her work, Lindsay empowers her clients to understand that they have already all of the answers that they're searching for within themselves. They simply need to learn how to access it. She loves helping her clients connect with their own spiritual support teams, and ultimately to develop the most important relationship that they'll ever have in their lives, the one they have with their self. So Lindsay, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to have you.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yay! This has been a conversation that I know you and I have been sort of talking about, dreaming about for a while. And I really wanted to, first of all, give our listeners a little connection about you and I, because we go way back, which is really fun. This is not something that I have with the majority of my guests in this season. But do you mind taking us back a little bit to perhaps how you and I know each other? And then we'll dig into some of your background in those pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. So Maria and I have worked together for, it's probably 15 years at this point in some capacity, right? So Maria was one of my first supervisors in higher education when I was right out of my graduate program. So we've worked in higher ed together, and that was an interesting dynamic because I was a new professional on my not only personal development journey, but also in this higher ed journey, working in student affairs. And then fast forward probably 10 years and we flipped the script, and I brought Maria on to the corporate job that I was working at. And so I actually served then as her supervisor. So we've had this really interesting dynamic over the years of playing both of those roles for one another. And yet we've been able to maintain a friendship throughout the entire process. And that can be an interesting dance, right? And path to walk with one another. But I felt like we did it very easily.
Yeah.
So it's been nice to see and help each other grow and evolve in our different phases of our respective journeys.
Oh, it's so true. And when I think back all those years of all the funny stories and people that we know in common, and that has just been one of the most magical ways that we've connected over the years, and really the mutual respect and appreciation for what we've brought in our respective roles has been such an important foundation for the type of conversation we're going to have today, because I really look back on those years of trust and respect and integrity that I think we really afforded each other before we even really dug into like the good stuff.
Totally. We weren't even talking spirituality like 15 years ago, right?
Yeah. So this is what makes this conversation especially special to me. So I would love for you to talk a little bit more. I don't know if the average listener might be familiar with or connected to some of the things we talked about already, like being an intuitive, a breathwork facilitator, a hand analyst, a spiritual coach. These are really important roles that you have held, and I want them to understand a bit more about what are those things? What does that mean to you? How can they access that?
Yeah. And so, like anybody's growth and development, my spiritual journey really started with hand analysis. And that was the introduction to my own awakening. I had had my own hands read. And when I sat with this person, I felt like she really saw my soul, right? So in your hands, your fingerprints are formed 5 months prior to birth. They never change throughout your entire lifetime. And they give us information about the lessons that you're here to spend your entire lifetime learning about and the gifts that you're here to share with the world. And the more that we align ourselves with that way of being, the more authentic, the more fulfilling, the more joyful our lives will feel. But when we get out of alignment, which is just part of the human experience, we feel fatigued, we feel exhausted, we feel drained. And so what the hands helps us do is decoding the information that really helps us to elevate the path that we were meant to live and helps us to unlock the consciousness that we need around the patterns that are no longer serving us to help us realign with who we really are, help us realign with our essence. And so when this hand analyst really saw me, I thought it was a little vulnerable, quite frankly. Sure. It was like, ooh, yeah. She's really seen the parts of me that I work really hard to hide from people, right? And so that was affirming that, wow, there's really something to this. So I decided to get certified myself to be able to help people in this way. And as I continued along my own journey, one of the things that became apparent to me is how strong my mind is. And I needed a tool to really help me to get my mind, especially my ego mind, right? We're not talking about like the egotistical type personality attribute that people often associate with the ego, but we're talking about this, your inner critic, that negative self-talk, that barking dog, right? That's always beating you up relentlessly, right? And I needed something to help my mind turn off. And so that's when I found breath work and decided to get certified in it, honestly, to take my own practice deeper in the process, because the type of breath work I practice is a pranayama breath, and it's designed to be emotional roto-rooter, essentially, right? Yeah. So most people, we are not taught how to feel our feelings. Most of us think our feelings. So if you're thinking about how angry you are in terms of, thinking about all the reasons why something is making you angry, you're thinking your anger. You're not feeling your anger, right? If we're thinking about all the reasons we're sad, we're thinking our sadness. We're not feeling it. And so what breath work allows us to do is to shut off the mind, get into our body, and release those issues from our tissues. So it's quite literally an emotional release and feeling the feelings and releasing them. Because once they're gone, it really connects us back to who we really are. It connects us back to our authentic selves. It connects us to spirit. Spirit really comes in on the breath. But when we get really stressed out in life, what's the first thing we do? We stop breathing. Our breath gets shallow. We don't breathe as deeply anymore, right? And so this breath work really helps us to deepen that breath, bring in more oxygen, also happens to flood the body with a ton of endorphins, which feels amazing, right? And it helps us to really get information from our high self, from our own spiritual support team. So I've loved being able to share that now with people because it's been so helpful for me. And then as a coach, right, I work with a program called the Divine Family, and it's really intended to help people to connect with their own spiritual support teams. I always think of the proverb, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. And the reality is that a lot of times when people are seeking spiritual guidance, they're looking outside of themselves to a psychic, to a healer with this attitude of like, fix me, help me, heal me. Can we guide? Can we help? Absolutely. But the truth is, everybody's guidance system is absolutely perfect. It is right. We are all divine by design, and everybody has the answers that they need within them. They just need tools to help unlock that wisdom that already resides within. And so that's what I really love doing, is helping people to understand how they work with their own spiritual support teams. How do they get that guidance? A lot of times they think that, being psychic or intuitive is a gift that's reserved for a select few. And it is true that some people have that gift more developed than others, but we all have intuition, and every single person on the planet can learn how to work with their own spiritual support teams. And they don't need to be, clairaudient. They don't need to be clairvoyant. They can access that wisdom in many, many ways that doesn't require some special gift or ability, as sometimes the industry makes it out to seem.
Yeah, and this is so important. And I know we're probably throwing at you a lot of different concepts that may or may not be familiar to the average listener. And I think one of the important pieces of the work that you do really is about connecting with that inner information. And that information, the thing that was the most powerful for me when I kind of got introduced to a lot of the work that you do, is about how that information is processed, as you so eloquently stated, not through the mind, but through the body. And as a stylist, I am someone who really is very present with someone in their body and how their clothes fit their body, what it represents to them in their body. And there's a lot of mixed emotions and unprocessed emotions about people's bodies. So I'm wondering if you can help. And I will say in this, from my own experience of breath work, which I have done many times with Lindsay, I will say she is a very gifted facilitator. She is someone who really holds space in a very intentional way that is safe. For anybody that maybe hasn't done it before, the first time might feel a little like, what are we doing here? This is a little crazy. It actually is an empowering, it's a fascinating thing to learn about how your body responds. And I really feel like that is such an important part of the work that you do, is about learning this new language of how the body communicates, that we, for many years, most of us probably our entire lifetimes, have suppressed and have ignored it, or just didn't really give it the credence that it was due. So can you tell me a little bit more about how, I know all of these various techniques and practices that you are involved in speak this language of the body. Can you talk a little bit more about this to help our listeners?
Yeah, I love that question, because the truth is, our intuition really is of the body, right? It doesn't come through the mind. So a lot of times, we as humans go to our minds immediately for answers. But going to our minds is the number one way that we cut ourselves off from our intuition and cut ourselves off from our bodies. And I want to say, especially as women in this society, we have so much trauma around our bodies and so many reasons why we needed to disconnect from the body, right? When we just look at cancel culture and the way women's bodies are socialized and photoshopped, and the messages that all generations are receiving around what their body should be like or needs to look like, subsequent eating disorders, right? All of that information actually traumatizes us in some way, shape, or form. Right? We're receiving messages from very early on. And so it no longer feels safe to be in our bodies. And so we use our minds to disconnect, and we start basically telling ourselves these stories around who we need to be, what we need to look like, and what we need to do to fit in. Because every human being has this desire and need to belong. I mean, it is a basic human requirement, right? To feel that sense of belonging. And what we really want to do is help people belong to themselves, not belong to anybody outside of themselves, right? And I get that can kind of be a little bit of an esoteric concept, because most people are just looking outside of themselves, looking externally for how they can fit in, right? And so for me, there were all sorts of clues through these different practices that really helped me to tap into this, right? So one of my life lessons is about unworthiness. And so when that was communicated to me, it was about how much shame I feel about different aspects of my life. So my mind is almost hardwired to go to this place of feeling deep, deep shame. And so one of the ways that played out for me in my life was I had an eating disorder. I have, now I'm in recovery from a binge eating disorder, but I was at my, heaviest weight. I was just hiding myself. I felt so much shame around the way I looked. I look at pictures at myself now and my eyes just look so sad. And Marie and I actually worked together at this particular time when I was at my absolute heaviest. And I used to wear, she'll remember this, I used to wear ponchos all the time, partially because I couldn't find clothes that looked good, that actually made me feel like the 26-year-old woman that I was, that felt stylish, but also made me feel good in the way I showed up. And so instead, I felt like ponchos were stylish, but they totally hid me. And I could get away with not having to have a variety of clothes because I could just pretend like I was cold. I could just pretend that, heck, we were in Boston, so it was cold a lot. Ponchos really worked for me, right? But the truth is I was really hiding this deep, deep shame that I felt using clothes as one of the masks. And so when I was able to connect the fact that this shame was coming from within me, and how do I really make myself feel and know that I'm enough at all times, right? What does that look like? So that was one of the catalysts for my own healing elements on my own healing journey, right? Because I decided I was going to get healthy. I decided that I wanted to treat my body in a different way. I wanted to love myself more, right? So I ended up losing 100 pounds over the course of, 24 months. And I just had a different version of the same problem. So I could wear the clothes. I was looking great, feeling great in my skin, but my attitude had not shifted at all. I still didn't feel enough. So whether I was really heavy and feeling not enough, or really thin and still not feeling enough, I didn't change my insides. I just kept changing the outsides. And there was still this mismatch and this deep feeling of unfulfillment within me. So when I realized that, right, I needed to try something else. And that's eventually where breathwork came into the picture, because what I realized was those things, looking at outside of myself for how to feel better, was not working. So when I started getting into breathwork, and it started to get into my body, because it's such a physical experience of working with the breath, I realized how it didn't feel good to be in my body. And I never realized that I held that belief before. But when I look at what I've put my body through over the years, no wonder I haven't felt safe and I haven't felt good in my body.
Right. There's like a disassociation there in some ways about where you were physically showing up in the world. And again, how you were internally, like where your heart was speaking and not speaking the same language.
Totally. And every single time we go into our minds about something with some sort of story that we're telling ourselves, we are cutting ourselves off from the wisdom of our body. And it's normal. I want to normalize for people. We are trained to do this. We are trained to look to our minds for answers. But, the truth is, if I am even approaching my day-to-day life right now, there are two ways I can move through it. I can move through it from what the perspective of my mind wants. Here's my to-do list, and we're going to tick off all these boxes. And that is what I am going to consider a productive day. Or I can take a deep breath and I can connect into my heart. And usually my heart's telling me, rest, relax, do less, right? And it drives my mind absolutely insane because those messages are not what my mind wants to hear. But that is the true wisdom of the body, right? But the mind wants us to push more, wants us to be someone or something different than we are. And when we really connect into that heart, that's where we start aligning with who we really are. You know, I kind of feel like we're all wounded in some way, right? And this is by no means to put any blame on any of our parents, because they were wounded by their parents who were wounded by their parents, right? So we have just, every human being innately has this lineage of wounding in some particular way, shape, or form. And so now it is our responsibility to heal those wounds. And so I like people to think of it almost like you've had mud slung at you your whole life, right? And now when you think about, well, how do I find who I really am? It starts by learning everything that you're not, right? And that's the first place to start. But when we realize everything we're not is basically all that mud that's been slung on us. So every message that you received that you weren't good enough, every message that you received that you had to look a certain way, that you needed to carry a certain handbag, that you needed to, you know, buy more, be more, look a certain part. That's everything you're not. That's everybody else's projection of who they think you should be so that you feel enough in the world. And the truth is, that couldn't be more opposite of your true essence. So think of it as that was all the mud being slung and flinged at you. And as adults, we're basically showing up covered in mud. And when we connect with the spirit realm, it's like the Windex gets sprayed and we're now wiping off all the mud, clearing that pathway to rediscover who we truly are.
And you've painted this picture so perfectly, because I talk about in my first season, I have an episode dedicated to authentic style. And one of the real elements and sort of the essence of that episode is about authentic style is derived from understanding and knowing your authentic self. And I didn't spend a lot of time in that particular episode about, well, how do you come to know and understand your authentic self? That I was very clear that is a discovery process. It could take years for some people, depending on the nature of the complexity that you've just painted, but also recognizing that it's an individualized process, and it's one that the person has to take on and to accept and to work through in their own way with their team, their support team, both spiritual and physical. And so having this process of coming to know who you really are is it's difficult to explain, right? There's not a linear process or a map or a plan that every one person follows that will get them to that end result. And I've had some people comment in that episode about, well, that sounds wonderful, right? To get to authentic self. How do I do that? And some of what you're talking about is really this process of utilizing some of these tools. And it's also a commitment that is not, again, of the mind, a commitment of the body to reconnect and sort of remember who you are from the beginning before everybody else's stuff got placed onto you. And that wiping away with the Windex and trying to clear out. I often think about the farmers in the cornfield, like when they're going down the cornfield and they're clearing out, right? It feels like that same type of process where you're trying to just clear it all out. So at least you can get to some transparency about who's on the other side of all that other stuff. So this could be a very long answer. So I'll try to simplify the question. But if you were confronted with someone to say, Lindsay, how do I access my authentic self? How might you coach them?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And it's definitely a process, which is what makes the answer somewhat long or more complex than maybe we totally have time to address. But I would offer two suggestions immediately. One is you have to get your ego out of the way, right? And so that ego mind, right? We need to know how our ego works. How does it mess with our lives, right? That ego, that inner critic, that barking dog, right? That is throwing out basically protection mechanisms, right? That keep you stuck. The ego was designed to keep you safe, sane, and secure when you were too young as a child to do that for yourself. And so those same ego patterns are playing out in you as an adult, even though you no longer need them anymore and they're not serving you anymore. But most of us don't even recognize what's happening. And they believe their own thoughts. I know I was guilty of this. Yeah. I was so identified with my beliefs. So if my ego said to me, oh, you're terrible at this, I would believe it, right? Yeah. So what I want people to take away from this is you have thoughts. You are not your thoughts, right? You have a body. You are not your body. So that's something that having that separation can be really powerful, to recognize that just because you have a thought doesn't mean it's true, doesn't mean it's accurate, and doesn't mean you have to believe it. But when we believe what our mind is throwing out, particularly the negative patterns, that's when we really start to spiral downward, right? It's like that roller coaster slowly clicking up. And by the time it comes down, there's a lot of drama and there's a lot of emotion and reaction, right? Because that is all the momentum that the thoughts have generated. And now you've got this storm of emotion within you from all the thoughts. So our negative thoughts really cause a lot of suffering, and they block us from who we really are, because that is not our soul, right? A lot of times when we feel very fragile as human beings, my experience is that our egos are very fragile, but the spirit is not. Our spirit is strong, resilient, right? And so when we are feeling, it's not to say that we won't feel vulnerable or tender at times, but the spirit is really strong. The fragility, that feeling of fragility, really comes from the ego. And the more we work to dismantle the ego, the more the real you can start to blossom, right? That's that place where we feel that hope and inspiration and positive expectation and belief, right? It's the ego that pulls us down into those lower level emotions like doubt and worry and frustration, So our alignment is another big factor in this, right? And so when we talk about alignment in a spiritual context, what I'm speaking to is, how do you feel? Do you feel good or you don't feel good? So when we are aligned, we are feeling those good vibes, right? We're feeling joy and happiness and excitement and passion and inspiration and positive expectation and positive belief. So what that says from a spiritual perspective, if you're feeling good, it's like good, green for go, right? Move ahead, plow forward. You are seeing your life. You are seeing the situation the way spirit would have you see it. But when we're feeling some of those lower level emotions, right? Sadness, anger, frustration, doubt, worry, depression, right? The list goes on and on.
Fear,
absolutely.
Gotta add that.
Oh my gosh, how could I forget, right? What that tells us is that we're not aligned. And so what that means is that the way we're looking at something is not the way that spirit would have us see it. The problem is that when we're in that vibration, we don't know how we're looking at it. That's not right. Because when we're feeling those emotions, that is when that ego goes on and jumps in to try to protect us from feeling those things, right? But it actually keeps us those things. It's actually going on to protect your inner child. But as we dive into the healing work, we learn how to feel the emotions. We're not saying that your emotions are not good, bad, right, or wrong, right? Your emotions are just, your feelings are just intuitive messages from your soul. And so if we can understand what the message is, so for example, if you're feeling angry, that is a message that your boundaries have been violated. Now we have to understand, did someone else violate your boundaries or did you violate your own boundaries, right? And sometimes it can be both. But all by way of saying our emotions are just communicating a message, but they're not meant to be thought. They're meant to be felt and released. So there is a way that you can feel fear in your body, release the fear, and then continue moving forward in your life. But what we do as humans is we feel it in our body. We go right to our minds to try to justify and make sense of what we're feeling and why we're feeling it, and get stuck in all these stories around it, which just prolong suffering. They don't actually help us move through to the other side, and it keeps us in these same old lifelong patterns. So in order to really connect with who we are and get kind of hardwired to our hard self, we need to be able to develop healthy coping mechanisms for processing our emotions, for feeling and releasing our feelings, understanding the message that they're trying to communicate with us, but then helping ourselves to get the information we need about our healing to be able to move forward.
I'll tell you, in a lot of my work as a stylist, I witness and connect with people in the space where those egoic messages, narratives, stories are on full force, right? They're like front and center on deck, and people feel very stuck and feel very defeated by the messages that they continue to, uphold about themselves. Again, whether that was imprinted from childhood, from other people, things that they've just come to believe about themselves. It's really an interesting space when I'm working with people to notice when those narratives show up. And part of my work, obviously, is to try to help people see and understand there's another narrative there, right? This other, the narrative of the heart and one of the body. And while I am not necessarily there to coach them through that experience, there are other experts and professionals like yourself who can do that and really help them connect to that knowledge and to be really intimate with themselves in that space. Part of what I want to help them do is to do the hard work. I guess I should say it this way, is to do the hard work about who really resides within. And can we have who resides within also express themselves in their wardrobe to mirror who they are within, so the outside reflects that same beauty, compassion, generosity, joy, all the beautiful vibration, words that you used, that there's more connection and synergy between those two things. So when I'm working with clients who are in that space of feeling shame, frustration, anxiety, worry about how their body shows up in the ways that their clothes sort of perpetuate that belief, I'm trying to create almost like a stop guard where they can say, you know what, this is not serving me any longer. I want to change this narrative. And so sometimes people come to really the hard work of the authentic self, like we're talking about, through the avenue of style. And they start to make some choices that start to reflect a little bit of that inner light and inner joy. And it's like peeling the layers of the onion, right? They start to like, oh yeah, this actually does look and feel like me, or this really does make me feel good about who I am. And it's this really fun discovery process. It's like the light bulb goes off, and sometimes it can be the bridge to help people get to the place where they can really do the healing work of their authentic self and what needs to really be focused on. And I feel proud of that, because the style work can serve as this tool. And you've also heard me in my episodes talk about tool for support. It can be this method, this technique, this approach that can help you connect with who you really are at your essence. So for you, you've had you mentioned your years in working in higher ed and your poncho years. I have very fond memories of Lindsay and her poncho years. In fact, a little side story for her going away party. We had a poncho theme. We all showed up in ponchos. They were like all decorated and designed. I mean, it was really, we took it to the end.
It was epic. It was an epic
pretty
going
epic.
away party.
Yeah. And of course we were poking fun at this thing because she wore ponchos all the time. And it was fascinating on a personal level, many years later, a decade plus year, to connect with Lindsay in this space where she had done a lot of deep transformation and has done the hard work that we're talking about today and is still within it, right? Well, this is not there is no end game here in that regard. Nope. We're constantly evolving and learning and growing. I talk about that a lot too. So don't let us make you believe that this is like a one-shot wonder and you're all set, but it's an evolving process that helps you come to really know and understand yourself. And I feel like I got a front row seat to seeing some of that with Lindsay, which has been such a privilege and an honor. Lindsay, I'm wondering if you can talk about, has there been any evolution in your own wardrobe?
Yeah. So I love this question because I was literally just standing in my own closet this weekend and looking at all my clothes, feeling like none of these feel like who I am anymore. And I have had a particularly accelerated evolution, I would say, over the last 12 months. I'm always growing and evolving, but there has been particular emphasis the last 12 to 18 months because I was preparing myself to leave my corporate job as a chief operating officer. So you can imagine the professional wardrobe that job came with. And now transitioning, to being a, full-time spiritual entrepreneur where I'm working, remotely and working with a completely different clientele, but also wanting to feel the flow in my own life and just noticing that the clothes I'm now gravitating towards are a reflection of how I feel inside. So where I used to really enjoy a tailored business look, that's what made me feel comfortable. I felt like I looked nice in structured clothing based on my body type. And I still feel that way. But I noticed that the clothes my body wants to wear, that my inner being really wants to wear, are flowy and loose and not tight or constricted. And I think that the clothing choices really mirror this inner freedom that I now feel, and not wanting to be locked in or snapped in or buttoned in. Like, I want to be comfortable in my skin, in my environment, in how I'm showing up every day. And that flow that I feel like I'm finding in my own life feels like it's being mirrored in the clothing. So I don't feel like my mind is choosing the clothes. I feel like my body is gravitating towards a certain look. And I also notice that I really look to different color to support me for different days. So like there are days that I just notice really feeling pulled towards orange. And I also then wonder, like, as we think about the chakra system and orange being associated with the sacral area and looking at the different projects that I'm birthing into the world. And I think of orange as such a supportive color for supporting that chakra. And so I also notice, what is my body feeling drawn to in terms of color, in terms of, do I want a dress and really feel, open and free? Or do I want, something else in the moment? So yeah, it does feel very different now, almost as if my body is driving these decisions. It doesn't feel like I am gravitating towards a certain look or needing to have a certain designer or, certain material things. It really is about like, how do I want to feel as I'm showing up, going about my day? And then when I go out and meet with friends, right, it's like, okay, how do I want to feel tonight? I want this to be fun. I want to be comfortable. I want to be. And so what really supports my body in that way? And it's not to say that I still don't have my own negative programs running, because I don't know, no matter how much work you do on yourself, we all have that self-doubt. We all have our respective insecurities, but we can also shut them down, right? And we can look to what does make us feel good, right? What do you like about your body? What can you accentuate based on what you want to celebrate? So that's how my own thinking has evolved and tried to shift to really help support my own choices there.
Yeah, what I would say is you developed your signature style. And that really is kind of the equation in my world about like when you've done the work of authentic self, and then your authentic style can be derived from that knowing, that understanding, that evolution, that real discovery process. Your signature style then becomes sort of the essence of those two things combined. And it's your mark, right? It's like if you had to put your brand and your stamp inside your clothes instead of the retailer, what would it be? And that, to me, that signature style doesn't have to be emulated anywhere else. It doesn't have to be copied from anywhere else. It doesn't have to be compared to anyone else. It's yours. And you get to like shine your light, do your thing, rock your world in your signature style, living your best life. And I will tell you, anyone that I have seen really come to know that process, they are nothing but like pure joy in interacting with, like being in relationship with people who have that. It's like a little magical unicorn in the world that's like dancing around and is like, who are these people? I want to get to know them, right? Like that's the type of confidence and power that I really want for people to come to know. And what I love about our conversation today is you've made it's accessible to everyone. It's not something that is reserved for the elite or a select few. We all have the ability to do this and to discover this about ourselves and live in the world this way. And I feel like if we can do that, imagine what it would be like to be in a community of people who've all done that, right? And not to sound utopian, but there is that sense of like that pay it forward element of if we can do the work for ourselves, look how we better contribute to the world. And it just continues to evolve from there. And that to me feels like that's how you build. I'm going to use a line from someone I love and dearly love. That's how you build your own heaven on earth, right? Like that's how you come to know and experience something really special. And for all the times I've talked about style, and perhaps you've come to this conversation with the belief that it's fairly shallow, or that it's just sort of like one of the many decisions you have to make in your day. So you don't really give it a lot of thought or consideration. I really hope through this podcast, you're starting to see there is a much bigger picture here for where style can intercept and interact with some really profound aspects of who we are as people. And when we give ourselves the priority and the commitment of doing this, I'm telling you, I see it. I know it. I have experienced it with people and I love it because I've seen it evolve in Lindsay. And it's been like such a cool process to watch and to know that people can do this. And when we're committed to that type of inner work and commitment to ourselves, it is pretty cool to see what comes out of it on the other end. Would you agree, Lindsay?
Absolutely. And it just feels so much better to move through your own day and your own life, feeling comfortable and confident in your own skin and how you're showing up. And I think when we're trying to be someone that we're not, that's what we're projecting to people. They're going to pick up on that inauthenticity. And then we don't feel seen. We don't feel heard. We don't feel valued. So it really is always an inside job. One of the things that I have just always admired about you is that, well, there's two things, honestly. One is the fact that you have taught me how my clothing is actually a mirror of my own evolution, and how you can actually look to style to support how you want to feel and allow it to be that inner expression. But I don't know that I would have made that connection if you hadn't been consciously pointing out how these choices that we make each and every day really are a mirror of how we feel about ourselves. And the second thing that I've really learned from you is that, some of the power of what you do, I think stylists often or at least this is my perception. This is my judgment, I suppose, or my understanding was that stylists would go out and it would be expensive because they would be picking out designer luxury brands. And if that was something that didn't resonate with me, I was thinking, well, why would I go out and I hire a stylist? But what I've learned is you're not about that. You're about helping people to find clothes that help them to express who they truly are and allow the clothing to support their own authenticity and to allow it to be that extension of their inner being, of their inner authenticity. And so for you, it's like, right, if it is about the designer, okay, if it supports it, great. There's no judgment there, but that's not the goal. It's about helping people to connect with what's really going to make them feel like their best selves.
It's like, I often will say, thank you. First of all, thank you. And that it's about helping you learn to wear what you mean to say. And it really gets to the core of that. What is this message about me that I want you to know as you're in relationship with me, that I can express to you through my clothing without even necessarily having a conversation or, right, being in deep relationship, that there are messages that we can share with the world about who we are through our clothes. And when we do that, again, it's such fun, right? It's fun to engage with people and have that sort of connection with people that you don't even know, because they've perhaps then done that work of what is that connection between your authentic self and your authentic style. So thank you, friend. Girlfriend, I love it. Okay, now people are going to want to know how to find you and how they can connect with you and do all the magical things you do. So tell our friends how they can find you.
Yes. Thank you. So you can find me at my website, which is just www.lindsaymorlock.com. It's LINDSAY, Morlock, MORLOCK.com. I'm also on Facebook, but mostly on Instagram, also Lindsay_Morlock. And those are the two primary ways, and where I advertise. Certainly you can go on my website, sign up for my newsletter. If you want to give breathwork a shot, there is a free download on my website that you can give it a shot, see how you like it. And I would, be happy to connect with you if you have questions after you experience that little exercise. So.
Love it. And I would say, anybody, if you're curious, Lindsay is one of the best people to start with, because she's been sort of on the other side of how hard it can be to start, how confusing and sometimes painful it can be to start in these types of processes. She's someone who I think really has her finger on the pulse of what it's like to be in those stages. So if you're nervous and you haven't ever tried something like this before, she's the perfect person to start with, because she really will make you feel at ease. She'll give you the information. You'll find it absolutely fascinating because she's such a good teacher, if you haven't already figured that out. And you will really absorb potentially some life-changing lessons. And I couldn't recommend her enough. I just think there is so much that she offers in her various work. So please go check her out. Go figure out if any of these techniques and tools might be right for you. And she would be a really lovely first step in that process. So Lindsay, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much. I just love this conversation, and I'm so excited for your listeners.
Thank you. Thank you, friend. And everyone, I will be sure to put all this information in the show notes so you can make sure you get all the info you need. And as always, thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks so much for listening today. If you enjoyed what you've heard, I would appreciate you taking the time to leave a review on the podcasting platform you're using, and share this episode with others who you think might really enjoy these conversations about personal style. For more information all about MFD Style services, you can find me on the web at mfdstyle.com, on Instagram at mfd_style, where I post almost 5 days a week, or send me an email at maria@mfdstyle.com. I also have a weekly email I send to subscribers, so I will include the link to that sign up in the show notes. So until next time, friends, remember to love yourself and then love yourself some more.